Reading the Times for Friday, January 10th, 2020. Reading the Times for Friday, January 10th, 2020. Iran missile accidentally brought down Ukrainian jet, officials say, citing earlier evidence. The crash occurred hours after Iran launched a barrage of ballistic missiles at American military targets in Iraq and Tehran, bracing for possible American retaliation, readied its ample air defense systems. After Iran began firing missiles early Wednesday in retaliation for the killing of Major General Qasem Soleimani, international airlines rerouted flights away from Iran, and the Federal Aviation Administration barred American carriers from the airspace in the region. Russia first sold Iran the air defense system, which NATO calls SA-15 and Russia refers to as Tor, in 2005, prompting American protest. House votes to restrain Trump's Iran war powers. Early Thursday, as yet another censure from the House loomed, Mr. Trump lashed out at Speaker Nancy Pelosi and urged House Republicans on Twitter to vote down crazy Nancy Pelosi's war powers resolution. In a striking display of loyalty, Republicans equated support for the measure with emboldening America's enemies, and embraced an argument that top administration officials have made privately to lawmakers, that questioning the president's authorization to confront Iran militarily is dangerous and unpatriotic. Today's War Powers Resolution is a non-binding resolution that simply restates existing law and sends a message that war is imminent, Representative Max Rose, Democrat of New York, said in a statement explaining his opposition. Lawmakers have historically declined to even try to use the War Powers Resolution to bring a halt to unauthorized military conflicts abroad. As the nation plunged into war with the Middle East under President George W. Bush, even amid skepticism about the intelligence that led the United States into the conflict, Congress approved new, wide-ranging authorizations of military force. Military force. Chaos is the point. Russian hackers and trolls grow stealthier in 2020. American defenses have vastly improved in the 4 years since Russian hackers and trolls mounted a broad campaign to sway the 2016 presidential election. Military officials are considering whether to embrace information warfare and retaliate against election interference by hacking senior Russian officials and leaking their personal emails or financial information. In the estimation of many officials and experts, the effort was probably a trial run meant to probe American defenses and identify weaknesses in the vast back-end apparatus, voter registration operations, state and local election databases, electronic poll books, and other equipment through which American elections are run. Trump's move against landmark environmental law caps a relentless agenda. President Trump on Thursday capped a 3-year drive to roll back clean air and water protections by proposing stark changes to the nation's oldest and most established environmental law that could exempt major infrastructure projects from environmental review. Under the National Environmental Policy Act, major federal projects like bridges, highways, pipelines, or power plants that will have a significant impact on the environment require a review or environmental impact statement outlining potential consequences. William K. Riley, the administrator of Environmental Protection Agency under President George Bush, said of the changes, "This one hits home for me." He wrote the first regulations for environmental impact statements as a White House aide in 1970. Around the country in 17 hours with Mikey Bloomb. Certainly no candidate in modern political history has built a more expansive operations in less time, positioning Mikey Bloomb to capitalize on any support he can generate should it ever arrive in large numbers. After being introduced in Chicago by a woman who outlined her career path at McDonald's, Mr. Bloomby declared himself more of a Subway sandwich guy. "No oil or cheese or extra vinegar, please," he said. "Maybe the senator should worry about herself and I'll worry about myself." Mr. Bloomby said tersely, adding, "You can't just walk away from it. They're legal agreements, and for all I know, the other side won't want to get out of it." He has appeared more animated, relaying the minutiae of his travels. At the heart of France's long strikes, a fight between the haves and the have-it-not. So Mr. Macron's rationalist pensions overhaul finds no favor in a union movement uninterested in that brand of equality. Macron's a financier who only sees things in terms of competition. We have a collective vision, said Ornat Bourget, a train driver who listened in the Gare de Lyon courtyard with hundreds of other workers as they were exhorted to remain on strike. It's two completely opposed views. Mr. Macron has a manager's eye view of France's pension problem that has found favor with his upper middle class supporters, some intellectuals and analysts, but not with the workers who want to preserve their gains. Going rogue, Prince Harry and Meghan caught the palace off guard. The botched announcement is also a human story of a recently married prince at odds with his older brother, Prince William, his American actress wife, isolated and unhappy in her cloistered new life, and a young couple enmeshed in a bitter feud with Britain's aggressive tabloid press. The site's genesis, people with knowledge of the family said, was in the couple's new charity, Sussex Royale, which they created after Prince Harry broke away from a charity he shared with his brother. The same is true for their tenancy in Frogmore Cottage, which the Queen offered to the couple after tensions between Prince Harry and his brother prompted him to request that they move out of Kensington Palace, Prince William's official residence. Prince Harry's real declaration of independence from Britain's tabloids. But we are seeing the fragmentation of media, the rise of social media, combined with the fact that they are a brand in and of themselves. They are a global phenomenon. If they don't need the media, the question is, why would they have a relationship with the media? From left, Prince Charles, Prince Harry, Earl Charles Spencer. That is a picture caption. Let me erase that. The royals do not always like what we write, but that's the point. Prince Harry's relationship with his wife, whom he met on a blind date in the summer of 2016, has been punctuated by a conflict with the tabloids from their beginning. Asked how Prince Harry would fare in the British news media, Mr. Edwards was foreboding. UK lawmakers give Brexit bill the green light. Once the exit plan has also been approved by European Parliament, the stage will be set for Britain to reverse more than 4 decades of integration with its continental neighbors, a journey that began when it entered what was then called the European Economic Community in January 1973. Now we will be able to govern ourselves. The Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, said it was time to get Brexit done, using his Conservative Party's election slogan, and added, "This bill does so." By contrast, Alastair Carmichael, a lawmaker with the European Liberal Democrats, argued that the government's Brexit plan is going to leave us poorer and more isolated on the world stage. But the tempo of the debate resembled a slowly deflating balloon, with the outcome of the vote a foregone conclusion. European officials are determined to prevent Britain from gaining preferential access to the continental European markets while undercutting them through lighter regulation. Losing Meghan, Prince Harry, and potentially billions of pounds. Just 18 months later, the couple announced via Instagram that they would be stepping down as senior royals, splitting their time between Britain and North America and working towards becoming financially independent. Just how much of a loss for Britain, its monarchy and businesses, could the new arrangement represent? The short answer is that it's rather hard to say, given no one really knows the exact terms of Megxit, said David Haig, chief executive of brand valuation consultancy Brand Finance, at a time when there has been greater scrutiny around the degree of public spending on royals who qualify for police protection. Harry and Meghan also noted on their site that they will continue to have a publicly funded security detail as they embark on a quest for financial independence. The royal family generates at least £2 billion of annual incremental revenue to the British market, from promoting endorsements and royal warrants to bolstering soft power. Kate and William were driving that long before Meghan arrived on the scene, he said. The U.S., Iran, and a no-win game. Since President Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear accord and imposed crushing sanctions on Iran's economy in May 2018, kicking off a cycle of tit-for-tat escalation, both countries have suffered consequential losses in each major issue at stake in their rivalry. While the conflict appears far from over and its ramifications could take months or years to unfold, so far, she said, the tally is looking bad for both sides. The United States has seen more setbacks than advances in its ambitions to increase limits on Iran's nuclear program, end Iran's use of armed proxies, and, most sweeping of all, remake the Middle Eastern power balance to Iran's detriment. I'm not sure how much international sympathy it really has, Ms. Kay said of Iran, though the U.S. has alienated a lot of international partners too, so that may be a wash. Both the United States and Iran are left, as a result, much further from the aspects of the 2015 nuclear agreement that appealed to each of them. Iran offers mixed message after backing away from conflict with the U.S. A day after President Trump backed away from further military conflict with Iran, a commander of the country's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps declared that Iran would soon take harsh revenge on the United States for a drone strike last week that killed a top Iranian general. Charles Michel, president of the European Council, the European Union's decision-making body, said he had spoken to Iran's president on Thursday, according to a statement, and expressed hopes that there will be no further attempts to increase tensions in the region, leading to a de-escalation of the situation. The statement also noted that the European Union was dedicated to preserving a 2015 nuclear agreement Iran had negotiated with the governments of the United States, Britain, China, France, Germany, and Russia. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Majid Takhravanchi, said Mr. Trump's offer to cooperate with Iran was unbelievable and that negotiations between the two countries would be meaningless if the United States continued aggression against Iran. Trump administration's actions in the Middle East complicate its criticisms of China. Complicating matters is the fact that while Mr. Pompeo talks tough about his detention of at least 1 million Muslims in China, Mr. Trump has yet to seriously punish China for the abuses. On Wednesday, the Congressional Executive Commission on China released a report in which it called on Mr. Trump to issue a directive ordering a whole-of-government approach to develop strategies to promote human rights, the rule of law, and democratic governing in dealing with China. The commission, whose annual report documents China's rights abuses, also calls on Mr. Trump to invoke the global Magnitsky Act and impose sanctions on China officials deemed responsible for the repression of Muslims, many of them members of the Uyghur ethnic minority. Trump claims Iranians were plotting to blow up American embassy. President Trump asserted without evidence on Thursday that a top Iranian commander killed in an American airstrike was plotting to blow up an American embassy. Some of the most compelling evidence that Qasem Soleimani was preparing an imminent attack against American forces and American personnel also represents some of the most sensitive intelligence that we have. it could compromise those sources and methods. Mr. Trump's comments came during a brief exchange with reporters after a White House event on newly proposed environmental regulations. The United States responded with deadly airstrikes on Iranian-backed militias, which drew outrage from pro-Iranian protesters who broke into the American embassy compound in Baghdad. Aides have previously said that only Mr. Trump was angry about Iranian attack that killed the American contractor and fumed as he watched television footage of demonstrators storming the American embassy. Kushner's global role shrinks as he tackles the 2020 election. Over the past 2 weeks, Mr. Kushner has had a little visible part in what has been Mr. Trump's most high-stakes moment as commander-in-chief, the starkest example of how much his role in the White House is changing as the Trump presidency enters its 4th year. Mr. Kushner's influence in the region extended far beyond his stated portfolio of negotiating peace between the Israelis and Palestinians, setting an early tone by bypassing cabinet members to persuade Mr. Trump to make Saudi Arabia his first stop abroad as president. During Mr. Trump's vacation at Mar-a-Lago, his private Florida club, Mr. Kushner arranged meetings with campaign officials to discuss messaging. Civilian planes shot down, a grim history. A Ukrainian airliner, a Boeing 737-800, went down in Iran on Wednesday morning, killing at least 176 people. A Soviet fighter jet shot down KAL-007 after the airliner strayed off course and over Soviet territory, killing 269 passengers and crew members and prompting several theories. Chinese fighter jets shot down a British-made DC-3 Skymaster operated by Cathay Pacific Airlines, the airline based in Hong Kong, then a British territory. Evidence that plane was shot down in Iran may upset U.S.-Canada relations. On Thursday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada said that his country had intelligence showing that Iran had downed the Ukrainian jetliner, which was carrying 63 Canadians among some 176 passengers and crew. But he stressed that he wanted a thorough investigation before reaching any conclusions. A crucial new trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is awaiting approval in the Canadian Parliament and the United States. As the circumstances surrounding the crash remained murky on Thursday, it appeared to be Iran, not the United States, that was coming under fire on social media for the deaths of the Canadians. Wary veterans exemplify a nation reluctant for war with Iran. In 2002, as George W. Bush administration marched toward its invasion of Iraq, Vice President Dick Cheney chose the National Convention of the Veterans for Foreign Wars to make his case for the invasion and was greeted with thunderous applause. Veteran services organizations, which have struggled to adapt to the younger and more diverse group of those who served in the military over the nearly 2 decades of grinding wars, seem to be returning to the historical focus on veteran health care and housing and have new concerns to address, and seem less interested in overtly supporting conflicts. House Democrats, who for years joined Republicans in granting the executive branch broad war powers for fear of political reprisals, are pressing for a measure to limit Mr. Trump's ability to wage war on Iran, one of several pieces of legislation Congress has passed over the past 2 years to increase its power over war making. Some of Australia's smallest species could be lost to wildfire. Her field site, less than 2 miles from the nearest fire, is just hanging on for now, Dr. Umbers said. In the last 6 weeks, Dr. Umbers has watched fires edge closer to her house from the north, west, and south, and she has already had to evacuate her house once on a catastrophic fire day. It's not necessarily just the fire that's the problem, said Dale Nemo, a fire ecologist at Charles Sturt University in Sydney. China identifies new virus causing pneumonia-like illness. Researchers in China have identified a new virus in a coronavirus as a pathogen behind a mysterious pneumonia-like illness that has sickened 59 people in the city of Wuhan and caused panic in the central Chinese region, the state broadcaster, China Central Television, said on Thursday. Preliminary identification of a novel virus in a short period of time is a notable achievement and demonstrates China's increased capacity to manage new outbreaks. Dr. Gordon Galea, the WHO's representative to China, said in a statement. Despite Thursday's announcement, many Chinese were still expressing fear that there could be a repeat of SARS. In fact, what people are more concerned about is the transmission route and whether it can be cured, wrote a user on Weibo, a popular social media tool in China. Overtaken by frigid seas, hours from help, there was little chance for survival. Perhaps 10 minutes later, he saw a light in the distance. One of the life rafts had come loose from the boat and emerged from the sea. In the frigid air, 10 degrees Fahrenheit, with strong winds, Mr. Grabble began ducking himself in the pool of water in the raft, which felt warmer. As the Coast Guard crew approached the second raft, the pilots warned that they had no more than 20 to 30 minutes left on scene before dwindling fuel would force them to head back to base. The Puerto Rico earthquake was 3 days ago, and people are still living outdoors. Many families, like Miss Ayala's, afraid to go home to buildings that could collapse in future quakes, have insisted on setting up camp in other public spaces, posing a new challenge for strained government services and aid workers. Jose Luis Casino, Miss Ayala's husband, wanted to be on higher ground and closer to the highway leading out of town in the event of a tsunami, perhaps the biggest fear among residents following more than a week of unsettled tremors. At the roadside camp in Guaynica, municipal workers have come by every day to fill a huge potable water container, which Miss Ayala and her friends and neighbors used to rinse silverware and wash up. Expanding Medicaid was a pipe dream in Kansas. Now it becomes a reality. Kansas Democratic governor said on Thursday that she had reached a deal with Republicans who control the legislature to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. Though Ms. Kelly's agreement included provisions to help Medicaid recipients find jobs, it stopped short of a work requirement that some Republicans in Kansas and other states have long called for. The agreement in Kansas, which would become the 37th state to expand Medicaid, came amid signs of a new momentum for expansion in several conservative-leaning holdout states. Competing for Sanders' New Hampshire voters, Yang and Gabbard. The director of the Quinnipiac poll said Mr. Sanders and Mr. Yang do appear to be appealing to some of the same voters. Is Yang cutting into Sanders' support? Potentially, he said. Some who said they were choosing between Mr. Yang and Mr. Sanders said they liked that both candidates had refreshingly blunt messages about the country's problems and were offering ambitious solutions, like Mr. Yang's plan to provide a universal basic income to every American adult, and Mr. Sanders' push for a $15 minimum wage. Steve Marchand, one of Yang's campaign senior advisors and former mayor of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, said the state's large subset of undeclared voters tended to be willing and eager to look to new, interesting outsider candidates. As such, he said, New Hampshire represents a real chance for candidates like Mr. Yang to surprise. Bernie Sanders' latest endorsement, Sunrise Movement. Sunrise's signature policy, the ambitious proposal known as the Green New Deal, became a crucial litmus test, splitting moderates and liberals on climate change, embraced by top-tier candidates like Mr. Sanders, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, and former Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana. Even moderate candidates like former Vice President Joseph R. Biden, the race's current frontrunner, have cited the policy as an inspiration and said its goal of drastically reducing greenhouse gas emissions while also addressing economic inequality was an important framework. In October, Mr. Sanders announced endorsements from popular House Democrats, including Ilhan Omar of Minnesota and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, who is a sponsor of the Green New Deal legislation. In recent weeks, with Sunrise likely to back Mr. Sanders, Ms. Warren announced she would hold a climate-focused town hall-style event in New Hampshire and rolled out an endorsement from Rihanna Gunn-Wright, a lead author of the Green New Deal proposal. Attacks by urban coyotes are rare, but frightening. A coyote attacked a 5-year-old boy near Peggy Notebaert Nature Museum in Chicago on Wednesday, sending him to the hospital. In Chicago, there were 20 times as many news accounts of coyote attacks in 2005 as there were in 1990s. In some attacks, he said, humans had been feeding the coyotes, which make them less afraid of people. Larry David's nightmare. Larry David has a message for his political doppelganger, Bernie Sanders. Drop out already. I thought when you had the heart attack, that was going to be it. I was going to have to fly from Los Angeles, but he's indestructible. Nothing stops the man. The comedian, who has memorably impersonated Mr. Sanders for years, told Stephen Colbert. That's the amount of support Mr. Sanders would get if the race were narrowed to the top 7 candidates, the survey found. Sanders' aides disagreed, saying they would benefit from a hypothetical exit by Ms. Warren, or from that matter by Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard, who have won support from some younger voters and disaffected Democrats, who might otherwise go with Mr. Sanders. Pelosi is prepared to send impeachment articles to Senate, just not yet. Speaker Nancy Pelosi quietly laid the groundwork on Thursday to send impeachment articles against President Trump to the Senate, indicating that House would soon end a weeks-long impasse and vote to bring the charges to trial. I will send them over when I'm ready, Ms. Pelosi said at a weekly news conference on Thursday morning, and that will be probably soon. The Speaker reiterated a call for Mr. McConnell to detail the rules for a Senate trial so she could choose a team of lawmakers best suited to prosecute the articles of impeachment against Mr. Trump for abuse of powers and obstruction of Congress. The Speaker elected not to immediately send the articles of impeachment to the Senate in a bid to pressure the Republican-led chamber into allowing additional witnesses and documents Mr. Trump blocked during the House's 3-month inquiry. At first rally of election year, Trump boasts about strike on Iranian general. President Trump opened his re-election year in the Midwest on Thursday, hoping to translate his confrontation with Iran into strength on the campaign trail, as he boasted about killing the head of its elite security force and derided Democrats for seeking to restrain his power to go to war. Some in the crowd shouted out their answer, "Trump! Trump!" although many others did not join in, perhaps quiet Lincoln admirers. Polling in Ohio last fall showed Mr. Trump trailing some of the 2020 Democratic presidential candidates in hypothetical matchups, including former Vice President Joseph Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont by 6 percentage points and Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts by 4 points. But there has been little recent independent public surveying in the state. A bloodbath, 5 dead as gang violence rocks Mississippi prisons. The Mississippi prison system is in a state of acute and undeniable crises, the letter states. In a 23-page letter, Mr. Thompson and the state civil rights group described the Mississippi prison system as being in a state of acute and undeniable crises. Gangs are a fact of life in Mississippi prisons, with many members belonging to one of 2 rival groups with roots in the streets of Chicago, the Vice Lords and the Gangster Disciples, said Jimmy Anthony, a retired criminal investigator and instructor at a state police academy, who serves as a spokesman for Mississippi Association of Gang Investigators. More recently, Republican lawmakers in Mississippi, as in other conservative states, have come to see these policies as straining families and burdening state budgets. Army denies request by soldier pardoned by Trump, setting up showdown. I'll remind you that the president has directed that Major Goldstein's record be expunged during his call with Major Goldstein, Vice President Pence, and White House counsel Pat Cipollone. He wrote, Mr. Stackhouse said that the decision by Lieutenant General Francis M. Boudet, the commander of the United States Army Special Operations Command, to deny the Major's request happened on December 3rd, but that Major Goldstein was not notified until Thursday. President Trump had warned before that he would intervene in the Goldstein case, saying on Twitter in 2018, at the request of many, I'll be reviewing the case of a U.S. military hero, Major Matt Goldstein, who is charged with murder. The Army said in a statement that the president granted a pardon for the murder charges. Twin court rulings buoy construction of Trump's border wall. The White House on Thursday celebrated a federal court ruling that will allow $3.6 billion in military construction funds to be used for the construction of the border wall. In a statement on Thursday, the White House applauded as a victory for the rule of law the appeals court ruling in New Orleans that lifted an illegitimate nationwide injunction, and in doing so, the statement said, the court has allowed vital border wall construction to move forward using military construction funds. The rulings came as Chad Wolf, the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, traveled to Yuma, Arizona, to host a news conference on Friday to celebrate the construction of 100 miles of Mr. Trump's border wall. After celebrating the court's ruling on Thursday, Brian Kolfage, who founded the campaign to pay for the border wall, was already tweeting videos of the construction crews. Vaping kills a 15-year-old boy in Texas. Cases of lung disease and death from vaping have tapered off since peaking in September, health officials said on Thursday, but the outbreak also reached a grim new milestone. The youngest death, of a 15-year-old, was reported by Dallas County Health and Human Services. We are seeing that severe lung damage and even death can occur with just short-term use of these products. The statement said that one teenager in the Dallas area who was hospitalized with illness reported having vaped for only 1 month. Thousands of people have been sickened by lung illnesses linked to vaping, most by using THC products. Good for Meghan and Harry. No one has ever resigned from the firm, as the British call the royal clan, though some have been exiled or fired, most notably Edward VIII, who had to renounce the throne and leave Britain to marry an American divorcee, and most recently, Prince Andrew, Queen Elizabeth's second son, over his connections to the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. True to the intense attention the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have attracted since their marriage in May 2018, the press was quickly filled with stories about their finances and prospects, and about how the Queen, the prince's grandmother, would handle the defection. In a statement explaining the suit, Prince Harry assailed the tabloids and the suffering they caused his wife. Australia shows us the road to hell. The climate crisis, in other words, would eventually become the moral equivalent of war, an emergency transcending the usual political divides. Since then, partisan views have diverged, with Democrats increasingly likely to see climate change happening, while Republicans increasingly see and hear no climate evil. What might an effective political strategy look like? I've been rereading a 2014 speech by the eminent political scientist Robert Keohane, who suggested that one way to get past the political impasse on climate might be via an emphasis on huge infrastructural projects that create jobs. In other words, a Green New Deal. Trump has made us all stupid. The events of the past week have shown that the anti-Trump echo chamber is becoming a mirror image of Trump himself, overwrought, uncalibrated, and incapable of having an intelligent conversation about any complex policy problem. We're on the brink of war. Trump is leading us to more endless wars in the Middle East. We're on the precipice of total chaos. This was not the calibrated language of risk and reward. For all the Sturm und Drang that surrounds Trump, populist Republicans and Democrats are gravitating toward the same foreign policy. We're in the Middle East. We're in the middle of We're in the middle of a clash of civilizations. The Middle East is so screwed up, we should just get out. We're too stupid, ineffective, racist, imperialistic to do any good there anyway. What if Democrats tried real outreach? We train people in the swing states to knock on the doors of the people they know, or call or text them with selfie videos where they'd say, "I'm a voter, come join me at the polls." Then these people would contact their own neighbors and friends and so on. In Detroit on Election Day in 2018, a dozen black women of all ages sat around plastic folding tables, calling friends and family to make sure everyone in their congregation and on their voter list voted. On every call, they asked, "How many people went with you to vote? And who else can you ask? And who else can you give a ride so they can vote?" Our approach was fueled by a simple belief that when you add new voices and change the electorate, you can shift what is politically possible. It's 1856 all over again. Northern voters were outraged by the attack, and even more outraged when the Telegraph informed them that Southern voters were celebrating it. Their main rivals from the Democratic Party did not technically favor slavery's expansion. They wanted to avoid prohibition and leave the matter to the voters in new territories. Republicans persisted through another election, trying again in 1860 to win the presidency with Northern votes alone. John Kerry, diplomacy was working until Trump abandoned it. After Mr. Trump authorized the killing of Major General Qasem Soleimani last week, Iran announced it was no longer obligated to follow the agreement, which had reined in its nuclear ambitions, and it launched ballistic missiles at 2 Iraqi bases housing American troops, to little effect. Diplomacy had achieved what sanctions alone had not. Iran couldn't have a nuclear weapon during the lifespan of the agreement, and if it cheated, the world was resolved to stop it. What did we turn over to President-elect Trump in 2017? Iran was in compliance with the nuclear agreement. For Democrats, what is the road to victory? It will take constant vigilance on Election Day to ensure a fair election and prevent cheating and voter suppression by Mr. Trump and Republicans. Brett Stevens says the country needs a bar of soap to cleanse ourselves of the grime of the Trump administration. The Republican Party has one. Former Governor Bill Weld, who is running against President Trump and promises to balance the budget and address climate change, and is just fine with Roe v. Wade, marriage equality, and legal marijuana. In the Mideast, U.S. foreign policy gone awry. A president's mixed messages unsettle more than reassure, quotes an Iranian American strategist who described President Trump's policy towards the Middle East over the past few months as strategically incoherent. In fact, U.S. policy in the region has been incoherent for nearly 2 decades, with the pursuit of policies that have created terrorists faster than they could be eliminated. Since the 9/11 terrorist attack, U.S. actions have worsened the stability of the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, and Southwest Asia. Mr. Trump's actions towards Iran will increase the terrorist threat to the United States, creating more tactical opportunities for the Islamic State and allow President Vladimir Putin to improve Russia's relations with both Iran and Iraq. Golf Club for the 1% wants to seize a migratory bird habitat. A spokeswoman for the state's Economic Development Authority said the agency has no estimate for the economic value to the state from the 4 PGA tournaments held at Liberty National since 2009. In exchange for the right to build, Liberty National has said it would offer unspecified funds for park improvements, create access at certain times to the Caven Point beachfront, and provide a jitney to transport people across Liberty State Park. The Friends of Liberty State Park, led by Sam Pessin, whose father was among those responsible for the creation of the park, has spent decades facing off against private developers and had hoped the Protection Act would finally secure the land as a free and green people's park. Liberty National is lobbying to amend the legislation to allow the state to solicit bids to develop Caven Point. Video related to first Epstein suicide attempt was lost, officials said. Word first surfaced recently that a video recording made outside of Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan jail cell, where he first attempted and failed to kill himself last summer, was missing, even possibly destroyed. Within a day, the jailhouse video turned up, quieting conspiracy theories about Mr. Epstein's death in a later suicide at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. Mr. Barquette said in a statement on Thursday, "The various and inconsistent accounts of what happened to that video are deeply troubling." Mr. Barquette said by phone on Thursday that he planned to ask the judge to hold a hearing into the circumstances of the missing video. Harvey Weinstein says his judge is biased. His judge disagrees. Mr. Weinstein's lawyers had accused the judge, Justice James M. Burke, of being biased when he suggested earlier this week that Mr. Weinstein might end up in prison for the rest of his life for repeatedly violating an order not to use a cell phone in the courtroom. Justice Burke on Thursday flatly denied Mr. Weinstein's motion asking him to recuse himself from the trial, saying that he was merely using hyperbolic language. On Tuesday, court officers noticed Mr. Weinstein using at least one cell phone in the courtroom in violation of a standing order by Justice Burke. In a hastily written filing, the lawyers argued that Justice Burke had apparently prejudged the trial's outcome, assuming that Mr. Weinstein would be convicted and thus would be eligible for life in prison. Cuomo's 2020 vision, turbulent waters, and so many octopuses. Anyone wondering what Governor Andrew M. Cuomo's 2020 agenda really looks like, needs to gaze no further than a commemorative poster that Mr. Cuomo unveiled at a private reception on Wednesday night after his annual State of the State address, which aimed to outline the same ideas. That's what my speech was all about. The poster was more precisely limned by the artist Rusty Zimmerman, who also did two previous pieces in Mr. Cuomo's emergency triptych. He called the experience of working under the governor an adventure. The poster was paid for using campaign funds, Mr. Cuomo's office said, though its final cost has not yet been determined. Mr. Cuomo gave a nod to Mr. Bryan's influence. In Mr. Bryan's poster, Lady Liberty wields an axe to corporate greed, represented by an octopus. Wild gunfire involving police leaves 2 dead in the East Village. Samir El Mestasi, who owns Hayati Hookah Bar, said the fight began inside his place on Avenue A near 7th Street as a verbal argument. There were no fists. We had 2 guys having an argument, Mr. El Mestasi said, so a security detail kicked them out of the bar. Mr. El Mestasi said the police asked Mr. Facey to stop several times. The guy pretended like it didn't happen. He just kept on walking. Maybe he thought if he turned his back on them, they wouldn't shoot him. Mr. El Mestasi added. Mr. El Mestasi said the shooting incident echoed a bygone era where violent attacks and shootings were much more common in the area. Facebook says it won't back down from allowing lies in political ads. Facebook can still profit off it. Today's announcement is more window dressing around their decision to allow paid misinformation. But many Democratic groups willing to criticize Facebook had to walk a fine line. They have pushed far more regulation when it comes to fact-checking political ads, but they have been adamantly opposed to any changes to the ad targeting features. These changes read to us mostly as a cover for not making the change that is most vital, ensuring politicians are not allowed to use Facebook as a tool to lie to and manipulate voters, said Madeline Krieger, who oversees digital ad buying at Priorities USA, a Democratic super PAC. Other groups said Facebook had been more thoughtful about political ads than its industry peers. Our approach is grounded in Facebook's fundamental belief in free expression, respect for the democratic process, and the belief that in mature democracies with a free press, political speech is already arguably the most scrutinized speech there is, Facebook's head of global elections policy, Katie Harbath, wrote in a letter to the Biden campaign. Impossible dumplings and beyond buns. Will China buy fake meat? In recent years, a number of Chinese companies have begun developing plant-based products, but those mostly target vegetarians, not the meat eaters Beyond Meats and Possible Foods hope to attract. In China, the main body that regulates the food industry, the State Administration for Market Regulation, has classified Beyond Meat's offerings as bean products and Impossible Foods' faux meat as soy products, said Ryan Zhu, who runs a local trade group that advocates for protein alternatives. Zhu Qiyu, the marketing manager at Whole Perfect Food, said the major obstacle facing Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods would be localizing their production, offering and understanding the Chinese consumer. In China, meat is often prepared differently from American methods, since many people prefer to eat it off the bone. Boeing employees mocked FAA and clowns who designed 737 MAX. Having carefully reviewed the issue, we are confident that all of Boeing's MAX simulators are functioning effectively. We regret the content of these communications and apologize to the FAA, Congress, our airline customers, and to the flying public for them. Boeing added, any potential safety deficiencies identified in the documents have been addressed. Mr. Lunsford added that while the tone and content of some language contained in the documents is disappointing, the FAA remains focused on following a thorough process for returning the Boeing 737 MAX to passenger service. The relationship between Boeing and the FAA has been a complicating factor for the company as it works to persuade international regulators that the MAX is ready to fly. After the congressional hearings, Boeing moved Mr. Gustafson out of his role working on certification of new planes on Thursday. New planes. On Thursday, Representative Peter DeFazio, a Democrat from Oregon, who is leading the House investigation into the development of the 737 MAX, called the newly released messages incredibly damning. They paint a deeply disturbing picture of the lengths Boeing was apparently willing to go in order to evade scrutiny from regulators, flight crews, and the flying public, he said, even as its own employees were sounding alarms internally. U.S. stocks in a sweet spot hit a record. The gains reflected growing confidence that even after surging nearly 30% last year, the stock market remains in something of a sweet spot. Interest rates are low and the Fed is unlikely to raise them soon. American unemployment is near a 50-year low and consumer confidence is high. Advanced Micro Devices, a chip maker sensitive to the trade flight, was up 2.4% after analysts at Mizuho Securities placed a buy rating on the shares. At 3.5%, the jobless rate is near the lowest levels seen in 50 years. The minimum wage is rising, but these workers are being left behind. The poverty rate among sub-minimum wage workers is nearly double that for non-tipped workers, according to data analysis done by the Economic Policy Institute. The federal minimum wage was last increased in 2009 from 7.25 to 7.25 from 6.55. $7.25 from $6.55. Since then, American workers have gone longer without a federal increase than at any time since the minimum wage was introduced in the 1930s. High school students who are at least 16 years old and work part-time can be paid between 75% and 100% of the minimum wage as long as the student is enrolled. Lebanon orders Carlos Ghosn to stay put. Until Mr. Ghosn slipped out of Japan on December 29th, evading what was supposed to be the close surveillance required by his bail conditions, Japan was set to put him on trial on charges of financial misconduct during his tenure as head of a global auto alliance, including Nissan, Renault, and Mitsubishi. In his news conference on Wednesday, A defiant Mr. Ghazan denied all charges against him, saying that he had documents that would prove his innocence. Lebanese officials have proposed that Japan pursue its charges against Mr. Ghazan in Lebanese courts, and Mr. Widat's office is awaiting a request from Japan to take further action on Mr. Ghazan. Under pressure, Grubhub changes its ordering system. Facing mounting pressure from regulators and restaurant owners, the food delivery giant Grubhub said on Thursday that it would revise its widely criticized phone ordering system to avoid charging restaurants for calls that do not result in orders. Which owns the Seamless brand has come under particularly intense scrutiny for charging restaurants fees for phone calls placed through the app that do not lead to a delivery, like calls to inquire about a menu item or to make a reservation. For years, Grubhub used an algorithm to determine whether calls resulted in orders and charged restaurants based on a range of factors, including the length of the call. Peak TV hits a new peak with 532 scripted shows. The 532 figure denotes scripted fictional shows, including the final season of Game of Thrones and The Big Bang Theory, as well as critics' favorites like Fleabag, Succession, and Pen 15. It includes Dick Wolf's army of shows, Law & Order, SVU, Chicago PD, Chicago Med, Chicago Fire, FBI, as well as Greg Berlanti's prolific output, an oeuvre led by Riverdale and You. The number also includes a slew of shows that did not break out in an increasingly crowded field. Its slate of new shows was led by Morning Show, a drama starring Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon that cost an estimated $120 million for its first season. A drama on HBO, for now, until HBO Max has like 200 shows, seems to me like a more serious proposition than a lot of other network offerings. Miss Paskin estimated that she had at least sampled 150 series at some point of the 532 series that ran in 2019. Megyn Kelly talks about Roger Ailes and Bombshell in YouTube video. Megyn Kelly has kept her distance from Bombshell, a Hollywood Awards contender that presents her as a key figure in exposing sexual harassment at Fox News. The video posted by Miss Kelly shows her watching Bombshell at a private screening with 3 former Fox News journalists, Miss Huddy, Rudy Bakhtiar, and Julie Zahn, as well as Miss Kelly's husband, the author Douglas Brunt, who is played in the film by Mark Duplass. During the sit-down discussion, Miss Huddy, who left Fox News in a settlement after she said she had been sexually harassed by the former Fox News commentator Bill O'Reilly, said that her mother once overheard Mr. O'Reilly pleasuring himself via speakerphone. Hackers cripple airport currency exchanges, seeking $6 million in ransom. The hackers told the BBC on Wednesday that they had downloaded 5 gigabytes of sensitive customer data since gaining access to Travelex 6 months ago and intended to sell it if there were no response by January 14th. We take very seriously our responsibility to protect the privacy and security of our partners and customers' data, as well as provide an excellent service to our customers, and we sincerely apologize for inconvenience, Tony D'Souza, the Travelex chief executive, said in a statement. The Financial Conduct Authority, a regulator, said it was also in contact with Travelex and expected it to treat affected customers fairly. The regulator said customers with concerns about currency orders should contact Travelex or the bank where they had placed their order. Right-hand drive cars, not just for mail carriers. For people who own right-hand drive cars in the United States, the infrequent headaches are the price to pay for a unique kind of fun. Our choice in diesels is limited to full-size pickups. Manual trans, almost extinct in every vehicle application. To be able to buy a Japanese-engineered, short-wheelbase manual diesel, pretty much unicorn status. After his first Japanese car, it was difficult to go back to North American market vehicles again, Mr. Hansford said. Mr. Zerschmeid, who owns both left and right-hand drive Minis, still sometimes walks up to the wrong side of the car. when he wants to drive. And that has been Reading the Times for January 10th, 2020. Reading the Times for January 10th, 2020.